Oh no, my video's not starting. I'm gonna restart my Zoom.
Please do.
Amanda, do you want to make me the host?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. Yeah, I'm assigning
Okay.
it to you right now.
Hello.
What magical space are you in now, Zemi?
It's one of the backgrounds that comes with Zoom. So the Northern Lights, wherever, I'm not sure where.
I've got some product placement that I can't wait to share. I'll show it again.
Hello, everyone. Those of you who joined.
Like the Northern Lights there.
Thank you. There's Amanda.
Amanda, you have no
Okay.
spectacles.
Backup computer to the rescue. I restarted my computer earlier today. I updated it and everything. Still does that. Okay. Semi, how is the gallery today?
It was pretty slow. I actually left around 3:30, so, and Molly was still there, and we had one more appointment to arrive. So our first appointment did not show, and then the second one did. But we had a few walk-ins.
Yeah, in general, have the appointments been full?
They're usually like 3 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've already signed up for next month. I was like, oh, I don't have to wait until it's September. I could sign up for the September show now.
I saw that. Starts in 2 minutes.
It's funny. I'm trying to make you a host too, but let's see. Okay.
Amanda's the host. Not me.
Yeah, she's the boss. Oh.
Demi, was that you behind the mask when John and I came in this afternoon? I didn't even.
No, I think that was Molly. I think by that point I was the back.
I didn't recognize who if it was.
Yeah, you probably just missed me.
There's the combination of mask and then how much people's hair may have changed during the months that we've been isolated from each other.
Yeah.
I feel like when I saw Molly, I knew it was Molly, but it's like, she looks so different. Or maybe it's that I've gotten used to seeing you all flat and now you have a third dimension again. Oh.
She got bangs during the quarantine, so that's different.
Oh, Molly did? Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I just got my hair cut, so it's been nice.
That's gonna join us.
Oh, there's Lupe.
This is a Daisha Devon Harris little picture that I just framed.
Oh, sweet.
Isn't that nice? Should make it so she's like the host.
You don't want your cat to host Zoom. You know it's not going to go well.
At least she's not trying to lay on top of the computer.
Yeah, she seems, oh, she's just gonna chill.
Nice cat.
Hi, Yu Yang.
Hi, Yu
Haven't
Yang.
seen you in a little while. Good to see you.
I think you also got a haircut.
Looks like it.
Yeah, I got a haircut.
Spiffy.
Did you do it yourself? Because I know you
No,
had
this
had-
time no. This time I just went to the one in my apartment building, like first proper one in I don't know 3 or 4 months. I
Uh-huh.
would say definitely worth it.
I thought you did a good job throughout the pandemic, though, or like while you were doing it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was not bad with my own haircut as long as you don't look at the back, because when I cut the hair myself, there's no way I could see the back. I use my phone selfie camera as a reference point, but it's definitely not as good as someone else cutting the hair for you. I think actually there's like I think I have developed a really good system. I think I'm just starting from now. I'm just gonna go to an actual barber shop to do haircut once every 1 or 2 months. But then between them, I'm just gonna fix the hair myself.
Yeah.
Maybe Chuck would like to tell us what he invented during the
Yeah.
hairstyle he invented.
I'd love to hear it.
The Zoom, well, it's called the Zoom mullet, where you
Oh.
just, kind of, I would just trim the sides myself.
Yeah.
And then and as long as you didn't turn your head,
Yeah.
it didn't look bad. But then when you looked, if Lois saw it, it was bad.
Right, as the person who is to see the side and back of his head, I finally said, go in the kitchen. I'm just going to give you a haircut.
And Lois has cut my hair, so
Yeah, now I have hair. I'm letting mine grow. And
Yeah.
Arctic Fox,
look at that.
Arctic Fox, see the green?
There should be a new pricing tier in all the barber shops called the Zoom tier, like online meeting tier.
Yeah.
Very cheap. They just like trim the
the
size,
Zoom.
and that's it.
Like $5.
Yeah, $5. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm reining us in now, Blue Sky. Thank you all for coming. And we may have more folks joining us, but I want to be respectful of folks who are here already. And to say, as ever, thank you to all of the Blue Sky staff, and especially Amanda, who, although Zemi might also be in this role now, that kind of the Vanna White of the show, who makes sure that everything actually happens while I'm pretending to be the host.
Yes.
And as probably everybody here knows, Blue Sky is now open for in-person visits. And you just have to book your appointment in advance. You will, however, not get to go in the Blue Sky cookie jar, because we think that's probably off limits for a while. But I was so excited when I went in that the Blue Sky staff had left me their last batch of cookies. So I might enjoy one during today's event. And our next Salon-From-Anywhere is September 23rd. And for that one, we will actually be talking about the show that's going up in September in the gallery. And this is the part where I'm going to say, is Kili the pronunciation?
Keely.
Keely Yuyan's work is going to be up, and that I think is what we're going to be talking about. There's another show that will be up as well, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And when does the show go up?
Next week. So this Sunday is going to be the last day for the John Baldessari show. So we will be open on Sunday this weekend, even though our normal hours for right now are going to be Wednesday through Saturday. So you can register online right now for appointments, and Molly will be there.
And you can also register for the September show already.
Oh yeah, yep. You can also
Um,
register for the September show. Mhm.
And it will be exciting to be talking about work that's up, even though we will all be in our respective domiciles while we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think most folks here have been on one of these before, but just a reminder that Blue Sky does record these, so they're being recorded, and that we have been using both chat and the raise hand feature, and Amanda just pasted into the chat how to use the raise hand feature, because these are really interactive. I'll talk a little bit at the beginning, but mostly it's a conversation that we're all having. And maybe I'll just start with this question, like, why do you all keep coming back for these? What what is happening through these conversations that makes them compelling to you? And maybe for this, folks can just unmute themselves as they see fit to speak.
I'm in Yakima. I did go to Ellensburg to the Gallery 1, but I mean, I would never be able to go and see Blue Sky people without. And I did another one via the Arts, Seattle Arts, yesterday on modern painting, which I would never. I just think it's a great resource. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable to talk to each other and kind of think about all the various issues that are raised by work and by what's happening in the world. And what the question is, why isn't everybody else here too?
You know, we always have a little bit of summer slide for any kind of programming. So it's not that surprising that we're a smaller group. And I think people are getting a little worn out from online connecting. But as Eugenia pointed out, like, this means we can all be together from wherever we are. And Chris, I think you're right that it has been really helpful for me in times when things feel so uncertain in the world, and particularly when we are in some ways being reminded of how far we are from achieving racial justice in this country, and in other ways seeing a real renewed energy around working towards racial justice, to have these conversations as part of what is helping me get through and kind of bringing that perspective to it. And you know, the reason I started doing these when we were in the gallery before we anticipated this kind of pandemic is really thinking, like, most people come into the gallery, they look at the work, they might talk about it with whoever they're with, maybe they'll mention it to somebody later, but that the gallery wasn't, had more potential to be a place to really foster community and conversation. And it's been fantastic to do that when we were there in the same space, but also to figure out how we're doing that here online. And in some ways, like, having both the chat and the raise hand feature is nice, because some people are happier speaking up and some people are happier writing out their comments. So that's interesting, and it lets more people join us from all over. And you know, part of my thing all the time around talking about whether it's visual art or literature is how we're building our understanding together. That I always say there's not a right answer. Like, what does this photograph mean? What does this poem mean? There's not a right answer. And that as we all are observing and building on each other's observations, we're also building connections with each other. And that has been, again, especially valuable as we can feel a little isolated in these times. And in one of our very first one of these online sessions, one of the participants kind of raised this question about, how do you create photographic portraiture in which the subjects of those portraits are empowered rather than objectified, right? So a lot of the power in that relationship really sits with the photographer as opposed to the subject. So how do you create portraits, or how do photographers create portraits in which the subjects are empowered? And given the groups that we've been looking at in some of the portraits that we've seen, there have been the abuelas, who are elders, Latinas, women whose immigration status can make them really vulnerable in the United States. There were women who are formerly incarcerated. There are African-American fathers and their families, and today portraits of Native Americans. And I think for these different groups, for a whole host of reasons, that question about how do you empower rather than objectify is important to think about. And I'm just curious, how many folks here saw Chip Thomas's work when it was at Blue Sky? Oh, not that many of us. So a few heavy users of Blue Sky, or maybe the folks who don't have their video on might have seen it. But it will be interesting to think about the difference between looking at it on screen and looking at it in person, especially because some of Chip's work was huge. So if you know the space of the gallery, the front wall of the gallery, when you were inside the building, that front wall was one image just wheat pasted across the whole wall. So it was a really different experience to look at, even than when we look at work as it's usually hanging on the walls in there. And I don't do a lot of bio, but I will say that it's interesting to think about Chip's role on the reservation where he lives and works, he came there as a doctor in 1987, and I don't think he thought it was going to stay that long. That often we staff Native communities with people who come to do very short stints, and they get loan abatement from the federal government for serving in underserved communities. But Chip realized that he actually wanted to stay as part of this community, and his art is all really collaborative. So it's interesting to think about that role, and that he is neither Native nor white, and how that may or may not be shaping his work, but also that his work are not just what we would call straight photographs. And we'll see that in some of the images that I picked out today. So sometimes it is a photograph, but often he's taken one photograph and done something with it, including those large scale wheat pastes, and then re-photographed it kind of in situ. And again, often in collaboration, either with people whose images appear in the work or with other members of the Navajo Nation. And I asked Amanda, who kindly sent around a little pre-read, just a little bit of information from Esther Beelan, who is Diné, about the Diné people and the Navajo Nation. And just to, I was thinking about it, like an art gallery is such a not Indigenous concept, because the idea of art as this aesthetic product or project that's separate from either the things that you use all the time in your life or the way that you experience spirituality and religion is a very Eurocentric concept, and not really centered in the kind of communities that Chip is living in and working in and photographing. And Amanda, if you want to throw that PDF into the chat, that would be great. I don't know that people who haven't read it need to read it necessarily, but it might be useful to have. And in part just to remember that there's so much diversity with over 560 Native nations within the United States, that to make any statements about this is how Indians are, this is how Native Americans are, is can be a real, it's sort of an impossibility to generalize, and yet it's really important to think about how culture affects the work. So why don't I stop talking and we'll jump in and look at a photograph. So I'm gonna share my screen. Uh-oh, host, you need to let me share my screen. Let me know when you think I have the power.
Okay, stand by.
I'll have a cookie. Mm.
I can't say why this is different this time. Hang on one second.
In a worst case, I could maybe chat you the PowerPoint and you could run it. You see how calm we are? It used to be like when we started all of this, oh, now I'm the host. Now I have all the power. Okay.
Yeah, I wonder if you can share your screen now.
Yeah, let me reopen the. Voila.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. This does mean that I can't see everybody anymore. So Amanda or Zemi, if you will be in charge of bringing folks into the conversation. But I thought we could start with this image of Chip's and take a few minutes and sit with it and just think about what are some of the things that you notice about this image, and maybe 3 things that you notice, and are there questions that you have? And if folks want to jump in either using the raise hand feature or in the chat, I'd love to hear what are some of the things that strike you about this. Oh, can you still see who's raised their hands, Amanda?
Yes, Chuck has his hand raised. Let's unmute.
Well, hi. It's a picture. It's a picture of people in another image. Right. So it's a picture within a picture. That's the thing that we're looking at the most, is the picture of the people, but it's a picture of more than a picture.
So it's an interesting, you said that's the thing that we're looking at most, which it's not in the middle of the image. So why is that where your eye is going?
Because it also has eyes.
Oh, so a kind of a natural responding to the human figure looking at us. And I think Laura commented in the, when you comment in the chat, I only see your name as what you look like on what you've registered as. So if you're using like somebody else's computer, I'm going to call you by the wrong name and I apologize. But it said, Laura said, the figures are of the landscape. And Laura, do you mind unmuting and telling us what you mean by that?
Say that again. I don't know.
What do you mean by the figures are of the landscape?
They're sort of embedded in the landscape. They're part of it. She's so weathered. She almost like replicates the mountains there, that the harsher landscape, and he's the youth coming up from, but they are there. That is the land and the people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a brilliant,
yeah.
It's brilliant the way that he's set this up. I think part of it is, as you said, like that we read the texture of skin and of rock. We read sort of youth, like he's coming up out of the ground, but also because he's taken a photograph in black and white across it, it also, I think it narrows the color palette in a way that it might not if this were in color. And so it allows us to see connections and texture that we might not otherwise. Amanda, is there anybody else with a hand up?
Yes, Molly does. Molly, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think in hearing what Laura had to say, I agree with that. I see it's almost like seamless, even though we know this is a constructed image. There's a relationship established between the photograph within the landscape, and in many ways it seems very, very natural. And we talk about the color palette as well. And there's this kind of like this texture and this movement that makes it very interesting, like where one image ends and the other begins.
Yeah, yeah. Eugenia, you said that it's like a billboard. What effect does that have for you as a viewer?
Putting me on the spot.
You knew I was going to do that. You've come to enough of these.
Did I? Well, you know, there's also the idea of the road coming in there as a rest stop. And you're coming in off the, you know, you see these big billboards. I mean, I think it's subconscious what you're, in a way, what you're thinking. Like, you know, announcing, welcome to Las Vegas or something, you know, and this is like, and the road is coming in on the left and there seems to be like a rest stop there. So it's almost like a coming into our land place to me, I think. But there's such an expanse too in it, you know what I mean? It's interesting. I don't really know how to articulate it exactly.
I think in some ways this is really a function of the West. I don't think if you had lived your whole life on the East Coast of the United States, I don't think you'd get this. If you'd lived your whole life probably in Europe or Asia, you probably wouldn't get this. Maybe you could have lived your whole life on the West Coast of Canada and gotten this. But both the Western expanse of sky and land, but also the importance of the road, right? That idea of traveling through the land. And as you said, like if you're entering this space, it is not just a space of nature, but a space that is tied to the people that we're seeing. And did Chris have a hand up?
Yes, he does. Chris, can you unmute yourself? I actually don't have the power anymore.
Yeah, no, I got it. I just had to click on the desktop first. I'm using the space bar. Yeah, and I think this is not a rest stop. I think it's a roadside stand. And when Chip first got there, he was from Philadelphia and the sort of graffiti culture and all this. So he did the wheat pasting surreptitiously and anonymously, and on a roadside stand that was closed. And he came back and it was open again and it was really busy. So he went in and asked the people who were running it, hey, what's going on? What's the story on this wheat pasting? I said, oh, it's great. Everybody's stopping here now. So we're back in business. It's been wonderful for us. And he sort of realized that maybe his guerrilla graffiti mischievous past was not the best way to go. So he said, oh, actually, I did it. And they said, oh, great. My brother has a stand. Will you go to his? So it really was sort of his, I think, the beginning of his real integration into the community as an artist, to not be seeing himself as an outsider who was doing things secretly, but to be a participant within the community.
And it's great that you use the term integration, because I sort of said in my preamble that this idea of the things that you make that are artistic being integrated into the use that they have, right? So clothing, baskets, religious things, and that this actually becomes that, right? Like he thought he was just wheat pasting in some surreptitious bad boy way, but in fact it actually becomes part of the function of the roadside stand. So I love that. And there's the Western Banksy. And also the idea of, that you tied it to a Philadelphia kind of urban graffiti culture, but I know folks who are Latino in Los Angeles, and they talk about that graffiti culture actually coming out of indigenous practices, which have to do with things like wall painting, right? So the idea of the space that we occupy being both natural but also reflecting human occupancy in that way. One of the things I really love about this picture, is also the intergenerational image, right? That we kind of assume, and I feel like I have forgotten the title of this piece, and it actually identifies the relationship between these two people, and they are in multi-generational from the same family, but like that's also a very, it makes sense for that to be how Diné people are pictured, because intergenerational identification is really important, thinking about who you are in terms of both who your forebears are and who your descendants are is a really important part. Are there questions people have, or things that you kind of want to hear other people talk about that you may not be sure about in terms of this picture?
Looks like in the chat, Linda said, wondering about any potential impact on the individuals in the photograph.
Yeah, and I know that over time he really came to collaborate with folks. Obviously this is a picture that was not taken surreptitiously, that they knew they were being photographed. Although I feel like I'm only noticing for the first time, does this look like there's a third person here in a plaid shirt who's not in the final photograph? How many mazillion times have I looked at this and not noticed that before? So I know that they were, certainly consenting to be photographed, but I think that he's worked, as Chris said, sort of more collaboratively with the community, both about what images are going up and where they're going, and also empowering some of the artists across the nation in their own work. Any more thoughts or comments or questions on this, or should we go on?
Can I say something?
Please.
I didn't know how to do the chat or whatever. It's interesting because when you drive by a road like that, and especially when the stand isn't open, and I think there's a tendency just to keep driving by, and it's flat. And by giving it the human face, that there are people who inhabit this, and it's almost like the land in the foreground is more rounded, and beyond is more almost like yin and yang, you know, like, and again, youth and older, it makes it, it makes it real. It makes it that there's real life there. And don't ignore that, in other words. So it's a nice message to me. Pay attention, you know.
Yeah, this isn't an empty place, which I think we can feel like when we're in the West. And I think that that's maybe part of our culture's relationship to nature, right? It's just waiting for us to come do something. But it's not an empty place. It's a place that is directly tied to the people who have inhabited it for thousands of years. And look, here they are. And as people have said, the tie between the human figures and the natural element is feels really visually underscored here. Chris, I see your hand up.
Yeah, we had we showed some work by Sharon Seligman, who I don't know if it was in Texas or Mexico, which side of the border it was on. But she was driving by and there was this roadside stand that had like a baby owl in front and had all these snake skins, had all this stuff that they were basically just kind of harvesting off the land and selling on the road. And she proceeded to spend a whole bunch of time with the family and walk back with them to their place, which was, you know, like a 8-mile walk away from the road or whatever. And where there was a grandma that was just sort of lying in bed to wait to see if she was going to live or die because they couldn't afford a doctor, you know. And it was interesting, though, you know, what you sort of say about taking the stand and humanizing it, because, you know, these kind of roadside stands are people trying to eke out a living from basically nothing often, you know. And I remember when we were in Mexico, we would see people selling nopales, you know, that they would pick on the way to their little booth.
Right, or that what seems like eking out an income from nothing may actually just be what we don't see, because we have a notion of like, well, shoes are made in a factory and they're purchased at a mall and they're right. That the historian in me has been enjoying photographing a lot of the lawn signs and graffiti and things that have been up throughout the pandemic, but particularly since the murder of George Floyd. Just like, this is a really interesting historical moment. And one of the signs that's in Southeast Portland, I think on Clinton Street, is a sign that says "Free Chililo Falls." I don't know how many of you know about Chililo Falls, but that was a trade center for various of the tribes that lived here, and it was flooded and destroyed because we all got to have clean energy with dams on the river. And so thinking about the importance of trading places, not just in terms of what you could get there, but that those were places where different communities and different tribes came together. And so that there's what we see as the roadside stand through the eyes of the, like, I'm gonna stop off and get a burger at the drive-through, may feel really different to somebody who's got a different cultural perspective. Chris, is your hand back up?
Yeah, it is. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, Salilo Falls was also wasn't just a trading post. It was also where they did the fishing. Right. And when these crazy white people said, "Yeah, we're going to drown the falls," the Native people were like, "You people are really crazy. You're not going to do that." And then they did, and it was this unbelievable trauma for the Native people to stand there and watch their center of their life being destroyed. You know, that they couldn't fish anymore, and that, you know, it was quite a thing. We had a show about it at Blue Sky, of course, Tom Robinson. We show everything.
Laura, were you also wanting to jump in with a comment? No? Okay. I might take us on to the first poem, and I now have to confess some things. I like using poetry because it is short, and it means that, like, we can all read it and look at it together. And because poetry has so much meaning packed into so few words, close reading poems can be really fun for those of us who love language. And yet the poems that I have chosen for today are long. And so we're not going to be able to look at all of them together. And that is moving me out of my comfort zone, where I want to do like a certain kind of close reading. And so I had to remind myself that actually the first poem is actually a Diné poem. It is by the poet Esther Balin, whose work I excerpted in that PDF that Amanda shared. But that Diné culture has for centuries and centuries and centuries been an oral culture, and that I need to get away from my own like written word comfort zone and feel like it's okay that we'll read the poem, but you won't have all of the poem in front of you. So that was one preamble to the poem. And the other preamble to the poem is that this poem features coyote. And I wonder if any of you guys know anything about coyote and the trickster figure and would like to share it with the group before you hear the poem. Just a general, who is coyote and what is coyote? Laura, if your hand is up, yeah.
Tourette, sort of like the wise fool, right? I mean, he's the trickster, but he has the double-edged sword. He's got a message to give to people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't take him lightly.
Yeah, so the trickster figure, which is certainly common in a lot of Native American cultures, but also in other places as well. There are African trickster figures and Asian trickster figures. But the trickster figure is, wise fool is one way to put it, sometimes naughty, but towards a good end. I over-identify with the fact that in the lunar zodiac, I'm a monkey, and the monkey is definitely a trickster figure. So I like the idea of the trickster figure. Are there other things people want to share about trickster figures before we meet one?
I'll go. So the deal with the coyote, I think also is that frequently he has some amount of supernatural power, but is frequently sort of at the mercy of his own wishes in the world, like to try to get food or sex, and his efforts are often foiled by other forces. So the joke's often on him.
Right, and whether you knew it or not, probably most of us grew up knowing about the coyote through the Roadrunner cartoons, which are not, it's not an accident that coyote is the one who's always trying to throw that, Acme iron over the side and ends up, instead of catching the Roadrunner, being the one who gets hit on the head somehow, right? I think Chris has a hand up.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's this genetic need to have a mixture of people who want to just stay on the farm and just do what we did before, and people who say, well, maybe we could live on the North Pole, let's try it. You need to have both. And so I think, one of the ways that Christianity has sort of differed from most of the other religions in the world is to completely deny the sort of trickster part. I mean, the serpent giving Adam and Eve the apple is like a classic coyote thing to do, And we should have knowledge of good and evil. Like, why is that terrible, But that's been separated. But in most cultures, it's like, oh yes, you have to have somebody who's shaking things up, because otherwise you just die out.
Right, coyote is definitely stirring the pot. Well, so let's meet Coyote. And the poem, I'm going to bring up the slides for each section of the poem. It's in 4 sections. And then we'll get to the end and you won't have the whole poem in front of you. So as I'm reading it, and you're free, especially since you're muted, you can actually read it out loud if you want, as we're going through it, so that you get, last time we did a lot of mouthfeel of the poem, reading it out loud. But just think as we're reading about what impressions that you get from the poem. And then at the end, it won't all be there for us to look at, but as I said, I'm going to get over my words on the page centric worldview so we can talk about it. And the poem's called Bluesing on the Brown Vibe. 1. And Coyote struts down East 14th, feeling good, looking good, feeling the brown, melting into the brown that loiters, rapping with the brown in front of the Native American Health Center, talking that talk of relocation from tribal nation, of recent immigration to the place some call the United States, home to many dislocated funky brown. Ironic immigration, more accurate tribal nation to tribal nation. And Coyote sprinkles corn pollen in the 4 directions to thank the tribal people, indigenous to what some call the state of California, the city of Oakland, for allowing the use of their land. 2. And Coyote travels by Greyhound from Albuquerque, New Mexico, USA, through Diné to Oakland, California, USA, laughing. Interstate 40 is cluttered with RVs from as far away as Maine, traveling and traveling to perpetuate the myth. Coyote kicks back for most of the ride, amused by the constant herd of tourists, amazed by the mythic Indian they create. At a pit stop in Winslow, Coyote trades a worn beaded cigarette lighter for roasted corn from a middle-aged Navajo woman squatting in front of a store. And Coyote squats alongside the woman, talking that talk of border town blues, of reservation discrimination, bluesing on the brown vibe. I don't know how to pronounce this word. A Bilagaana snaps a photo. The Navajo woman stands, holding out her hand, requesting some of her soul back. Instead, she replaces her soul with a worn picture of George Washington on a dollar bill. And Coyote starts on another ear of corn, climbing onto the Greyhound, the woman, still squatting, waiting, tired of learning not to want, waits there for the return of all her pieces. 3. And Coyote wanders right into a Ponca sitting at the Fruitvale BART station. Next to the Ponca is a Seminole. Coyote struts up to the two. Where y'all from? The Ponca replies, Oklahoma. Pause. The Seminole, silent, watches a rush of people climb in and out of the train, headed for Fremont. The Seminole stretches his arms up and backs stiff from the wooden benches. Pause. He pushes his lips out toward the Ponca, slowly gesturing that he too is from Oklahoma. Coyote wanders. Whereabouts? The Ponca replies, Ponca City. Pause. The Seminole replies, Seminole. Coyote gestures to the Ponca. You Ponca? The Ponca nods his head in affirmation. The Coyote nods his head in content to the Seminole. Coyote asks, you Seminole? Pause. The Seminole, now watching some kids eating frozen fruit bars, nods his head. And Coyote shares his smokes with the two, and 10 minutes later, they travel together on the Richmond train, headed for Wednesday night dinner at the Intertribal Friendship House. 4. And Coyote, losing on the urban brown funk vibe, wanders in and out of existence, tasting the brown, rusty at times, worn bitter from relocation. All right, so now we get to the fun part where I say, well, as with the photograph, what are some of the things you notice, or what are some of the questions that you have?
Laura, did you want to start?
Is there a way to look at the poem again, or like just have the
Sure,
beginning?
sure.
Yeah, just- well, okay, thank you.
I know, I see that you're like me and you want to see words on the page.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that struck me right away was in the first part, the ironic immigration. You know, like they're not immigrants, right? But they're traveling through. So
Right.
that one came to mind.
And traveling back and forth, right? That, you know, the Diné population is one of the largest Navajo, one of the largest Native nations in the country, but about half of the Diné people are not living on Navajo land.
Right.
So you're moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And Greyhound traditionally is not the most upscale way to travel.
It's the best. It was always
Well, I mean, you know, one thing that the Greyhound is great for is the cross-section of humanity. You know, Walt Whitman wrote a famous poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, because if you're on public transit, that's where you're seeing humanity, right? Brooklyn Ferry was not romantic. It was a Greyhound bus of its day. So Chris put in the chat, right? Here's the this question about, you know, why is it that the Native people are positioned as the immigrants versus the European Americans? But I think that that's why he sort of says more accurate tribal nation to tribal nation, and that the pre-conquest experience that you would have in the Americas would be that all the time. I mean, not all tribes got along with each other, so you might be going from friendly to hostile territory, but that idea of moving through, you know, land that was Diné versus land that was, you know, Panka, probably pretty far apart for pre-conquest, but still. Eugenia, you've got your hand up, and then it looks like Linda's got something in the chat.
Oh yeah, I like this. I was just Googling East Oakland. I mean, it says the Oakland Powwow. I mean, I used to live and work in Oakland, just Oakland represent, and I went to college there. So just saying, there's all this connection to Oakland. I was like, anyway, there's just one of the most multicultural cities, one of the most, you know, it's, and I like the whole idea of the Greyhound. I used to take the Green Tortoise cross country, the Greyhound, rainbow gatherings before Burning Man, all these kind of and there were, my first powwows were in California that I would go to. So I think the whole cross-continental and vast and the American kind of melting pot kind of thing. And it just, I like the poem a lot for that reason, and the melting of brown on brown and the whole, and I don't know, but I just wanted to say I enjoyed all of that. And the Greyhound, you know, I mean, you know, it's great. Now it's a little different now, but you know, read Aaron Comet Bus or whatever. I mean, it's just like there's a lot of good stuff in here, is all I'm saying. So, and as a person who,
right,
you know,
and that we have a tremendous urban Indian population in this country, including in Portland. My statistics are a little out of date, but at some point when I was working on something, I quoted a statistic where we have like the 8th largest urban Native population in the country. So we don't necessarily think of Oakland, although we think of it as very multicultural, as being having a huge indigenous population, but it does. And in fact, for those of you who know the Tommy Orange novel, There, There, it's set in Oakland. And the Native people there in that novel are not from California tribal nations. They're displaced from their homelands. Yeah, but
just touched on a lot of stuff.
Yes.
That's thank you. and I write poetry sometimes, so it kind of like I don't know, it's kind of interesting to, I really enjoyed it. That's all.
And so Linda, you put something in the chat about the coyote is positioned not in some mythic time, but right in the present, like definitely, right? I mean, like I've ridden that train across the East Bay, right? So some of us can know the place and know some of what he's talking about, but are there ways in which, I think Chuck was the one who said, well, coyote also often has some supernatural power. So is this coyote only in the present, or is this coyote also exercising his, I'm not like regular folks, I can transcend time, or other ways that we see his trickster nature in the poem? I can also try and move through some of the other screens. Does anybody have a hand up, Amanda?
No, not at the moment. Unless, Eugenia, did you want to chime in again?
No, I don't know. Keep on forgetting we're being recorded, you guys. Hi, everybody. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Chris would like to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's maintaining a consciousness over, you know, back to pre-Europeanization time. So I think there's a sense in which he's not like time traveling in the way that we think of it in science fiction, but he's time traveling in the way that we do it as we get older and older. And think about, oh yeah, well, you know, back in such and such a time when I went to the Jimi Hendrix concert or something, you know, you kind of carry the past with you. And I think he's doing that. And I kind of do think that is a superpower.
Yeah, I think he's carrying a past that exists beyond what we would think of as a human lifetime or a coyote lifetime, in terms of the actual animal coyote, not the trickster figure coyote. And you know, the first section and then also this section start with and coyote, right? So we're in medias res. Coyote he's been coyoteing around even before he starts bluesing on the brown vibe. And I think that also fits with what you're saying, and that he's not the narrator, he's not the persona, he's not speaking what's happening, because we're watching somebody describe coyote to us, but the coyote is sort of both a character and he's got a little bit more omniscience, it seems like, because he's putting things together or seeing things from a different perspective, even though sometimes, because he's the wise fool, he's also missing the point, right? So that when he's talking to the two figures in the next section, the Ponca and the Seminole, it takes him a while to clue into the fact that they're Ponca and Seminole, even though we, as the readers of the poem, already know that. Other thoughts about the poem or questions about the poem? Did it make you feel like you were outside of what was happening, or did it draw you in and make you feel like you were inside what was happening? And that's, I mean, as I said, there are not right answers, but that in particular is a really personal response question. Were there points of entry?
Hey, let's hear from Chuck.
I think it's interesting that he's sort of this observer. So he's like this, you know, if he were, it's almost like he's a nationwide flaneur, right? He's just sort of observing the white people, he's observing his own people, he's getting a laugh out of some of it. It's unclear to what his sense of attachment is. He's sort of attached to the woman he trades with. He's attached to the sort of two guys at the train station. But it also feels like he's a little bit separate from all the action at the same time.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if the woman is identified. Yeah, she's Navajo, Ponca, Seminole. So they all have tribes that are not his tribe, right? Coyote is sort of supra tribe. But that at the same time, like the difference between trading the worn beaded cigarette lighter for roasted corn, like that's how you're supposed to interact with people. You don't take their picture and then pay them $1. You've stolen her soul, right? That he knows how to interact with them, even when he kind of seems a little bit slow in the uptake about the Ponca and the Seminole being Ponca and Seminole, but also that it's about this kind of different relationship to tribe. They head for the Wednesday night dinner at the Intertribal Friendship House. Lindsay, you said you felt like an observer. Can you say more about that?
Linda, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you could hold the space bar down on your keyboard.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe it just reflects that I was identifying with coyote.
So that you're an observer in the way that coyote is an observer, not yeah. And I think that the poem sort of is getting us to do that. And coyote and coyote and coyote. He is our through line into this experience, and it's his experience that even. I mean, it's an interesting question for those of us who like to obsess about poetry, right? Is how does this poem do that so effectively without making coyote the I, right? As a writer, if I want you to identify with the character, I just write it in first person, because then every time you read it is like, I do this, I do this, I do this. And that puts it in your head. And yet saying, and coyote and coyote and coyote makes you able to identify with coyote.
This almost feels like this could have been a play, you know, or a coyote is, this is a photography thing, like he's holding the video camera about this. That's how I felt. I was sort of on the journey with them. It wasn't, I was in it. yeah, so I wasn't just, well, I was an observer, but not really. I mean, because I wasn't a member, but yeah, it made it, that's how I felt. I felt it was a play. These were real people, and they were framed in that. Yeah, I cared what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also part of the brilliance of Esther Balin's writing, is that the characters come in and out so briefly, and yet they feel fully realized. They don't feel flat or stereotypical, which we know that American culture is full of flat, stereotypical portrayals of Native Americans. So the fact that she can make them real and give them depth so quickly, and as you said, like we're on the road trip with Coyote, and what's more American than a road trip?
Chris, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, I don't know about the Ponca, but the Navajo also have this relationship. I mean, the Hopi ended up like going to the federal government saying, these guys are taking our land, you know. The Navajo just spread over the Hopi, and the Seminole were not from Florida. They sort of fled to hide in the Everglades. So he's already, the two of the three tribes that he mentioned are already people who are kind of taking geographic freedom to make their lives work in a way that he's kind of replicating by being a coyote on the Greyhound.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about. Again, I can't help myself. I want to obsess about words of the page, right? That the very last word of this poem is relocation, and the very last phrase is worn bitter from relocation, even though bluesing on that brown vibe doesn't sound negative to me necessarily. I think that he's enjoyed bluesing on the brown vibe all through the poem, but by the end, tasting the brown, rusty at times, worn bitter from relocation, is a really, it's definitely at best a bittersweet ending to our road trip. Oh, and Daniel has put this interesting comment in the chat about that Coyote, am I understanding you right, Daniel, that Coyote can tell that the Ponca and the Seminole are not the same, even though he doesn't know what they are. Can you like say a little bit more about that? And I can put it back to that screen if you want to unmute.
And to easily do that, you can just hold the space bar down.
Were you guys able to hear me just now?
Only once you were asked, were you able to hear me just now?
Okay, yeah, I got, for some reason the spacebar doesn't seem to be working for me. Okay, I was just thinking about the fact that he might not have known the affiliations of the two at the station, but we only know it because the narrator told us, and we wouldn't likely know that they were different in any way if we were not also Native. And I just thought that was interesting, and also the fact that they ended up going to a place that kind of welcomed them both, but it wasn't kind of like it wasn't necessarily I don't know, a reunion or a uniting, more as just kind of like you said about the bittersweet a notion of life.
Well, some of that is how much difference gets erased when there's a larger difference that you're submerged into, right? So we use the phrase African American and Asian American all the time, whereas people across Asia don't have a sense of like, oh, we're all Asian. People across Africa don't have a sense of we're all African. Like specificity means a lot to the people in those places, but within the larger dominant white culture of America, we kind of create these united identities. And I think that that's part of maybe what you're getting at, is that Coyote can see difference even if he asks that he can't see exactly what the difference is, but he can see that the difference is there. But then it turns out once you're on the Richmond train, you're all headed to the intertribal friendship house ultimately.
Right.
Thank you. Chris, is your hand back up?
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, you know, if you read Tony Hillerman books, and if you haven't, they're lovely. But you know, when Native people introduce themselves to each other, they don't just say, "Oh, I'm this tribe." You say, "What clan are you born from, and what clan are you born into?" You know, there's a much more complicated genealogy being expressed there. That this is sort of from a outside perspective in a way. That, as you say, you say, "Oh yes, I'm Asian." But if you're actually two Asians talking to each other, you wouldn't just say that. You know, so this is kind of in a not quite insider point of view.
Yeah, and that question about even the importance of identifying yourself. So if you're at some public event and somebody who's Native American is speaking, they will usually identify themselves in their own language, maybe more than one language, because they might be descended from more than one tribe as well as more than one clan, but their name, their clan, their tribal identity. And that's really important. And even I've seen speakers who'll get up and they will introduce family members, like, "Oh, my grandfather is here, and my uncle is here, and my niece are here." Even though I'm the one who's going to be speaking, I will bring them all up and to stand with me, because that is how I perceive my place in the world. And it's a really different thing, but I think relates back to that first photograph where we're looking at. Do you guys want to look at another image now? Or do we want to talk more about this poem? Ready for the next image?
Let's go to the next image.
All right. And I'm going to say, and Blue Sky staff will back me up on this, Chip's had amazingly powerful art. He was not always the most likely to disclose a lot about the images. And so I can't tell you much about how particular images came to be or in what role he had versus the folks that he's collaborating with in making the work. So we're all going into this not necessarily knowing very much, but take a few minutes with this image. Again, think about, what do you notice and what questions do you have, while I eat another cookie.
You're tantalizing us with those cookies.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we were talking earlier about how much agency do you give the subject versus how much is the photographer keeping to themselves, the fact that this is written directly on the subject's face means it's not being put in retroactively later where the subject is gone and they don't have any control over it anymore. There's a importance on that. I think that's not just aesthetic, but it's also taking a certain responsibility for making sure that the subject is acquiescing in the context you're putting them into.
Although it also raises this interesting question about what it means to inscribe something onto somebody's body. Is that, how do we look at that? And I think about that a lot coming out of, you know, my early training as a feminist, which was very much about cultural norms being placed on women's bodies and trying to make your body, wear makeup, for example, to fit into a culturally defined notion of beauty, to feel like your body wasn't right or enough as it is. And I'm not saying that that's what's going on here, but I think it's an interesting question to start thinking about. Looks like, does Chuck have a hand up?
Yeah, so I'm curious about some of the things in this image. It says, "I am the change." Almost looks like "I am the chance," but we're going to go with "I am the change." But the things that are below the eyes are all terrible things. So it's unclear to me what this person is, or is this person supposed to represent? all the terrible things or to change them for the better. It's really unclear to me what the intent of the message or what the person represents.
Yeah, and I think it looks like Daniel has not the same comment, but a comment that we could take with that, which is like that the I think that says I, you read it as I read it as I, but that it seems almost to be covered up. And certainly if we presume that there were a whole bunch of photos shot, that there was an opportunity to be like, oh wait, move your ring finger is blocking the I, right? So what does it mean to have that somewhat obscured? And as you say, we usually want the like, be the change that you want to see in the world positive message. And what does it mean to say, I am the change, and then read industrialization, pollution, drought, water, air, earth, fake snow, CO2. I mean, we're all in this together, folks. So don't feel like you have to know the answer if you want to just keep raising questions. Molly has said in the chat, that there's a relationship between figure and text here, but we're not quite sure whose voice it is. And Eugenia has said, oh yeah, but I really like this work. And I do too. I found this an incredibly compelling image, but I'm not sure I know what to make of it.
There's also an interesting sort of dichotomy between I am the change, which is up in this kind of cerebral zone, and all the other words which are down, like associated with the senses, the seeing and the smelling and the tasting senses. It's sort of hard to figure out.
Yeah, I like that you took those to senses, because I had been thinking about that just in terms of well, maybe I am the change is like, I'm going to change all of these bad things that are going on if we read industrialization, pollution, drought as negative, but that also that separation also puts them in a sensory space. And, Gina has pointed out that water, air, earth are not necessarily negative concepts. They may also be sort of squished out by the industrialization, the pollution, the drought, the fake snow, the CO2.
Well, if I can just really quickly, I think, and I said it in the chat, I feel that it's saying she's everything. I mean, we're animals, we're liquid, we are earth, we are air, we are literally part of this whole thing. So everything, we encompass everything. I have a bunch of pollutants inside me now because I've been eating plastic, basically. I mean, everything that's how I read this. It's kind of like, I am the change, but I'm everything. And whatever happens is also what becomes. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to explain, but if it makes any sense to people.
Well, and I want to
it all, everything.
And I want to connect that to the comment that Jude put in the chat about, if we think about this person as being painted for action, right? The painting around the eyes as painted for action, then we could see this as that which she's warring against. And you said, it reminds me of the water protectors. Do you mind telling people who the water protectors are?
The water protectors, there were a group of Aboriginal folk in the States who were basically protesting about the building of a pipeline because they were protecting their water from potential pollution. And of course, they were removed from the land. I think this was a year or so ago.
Yeah, so thinking about.
So the Aboriginal people have taken a stand, fighting for the environment. And right. In that case, they were fighting for the safety of water.
Right, and that's a direct impact on health, on land that is not just the land that you happen to live on, but land that is often sacred to your family back for many, many generations.
Well, and not just their land, but everybody's land,
right.
Protecting everybody's water,
right.
Everybody's protecting everybody from pollution, industrialization. So it's a broader impact they're the warriors, but it's got a broader impact.
So like, what do we make of that, seems to be some sort of traditional marking around the eyes, to the fact that, is this person wearing a t-shirt? Like, that's, what's the mix here going on between what we think of as traditional or even regalia versus like the completely casual dress?
Hey, Chris, what do you have to say?
Well, for me, this relates to like the first thing we said about the sort of ambiguity of I am the change. It's like we have to be the change for good because we're already the change for bad. We're already part of the industrialization and the pollution and all. I mean, you know, we were already wrecking things. It's like the original sin. You know, you're born into a culture that's destroying the planet. So you have to, it's like carbon offsets. You have to kind of actively make the change back in the right direction to go in net plus when you have a big minus built into your existence from your t-shirts and your cars and your plane fare that you're flying to the environmental conference and using up the atmosphere doing it.
Yeah, and some of the other things that people have been talking about in the chat are just like the gesture of the hands. How do we read that hand gesture? How do we read the gender of this figure? Somebody said she, and I was like, do I feel like I know that it's a she? Maybe. I'm trying to read the shape of the face, but I think I'm not. It seems like Linda at least is saying, well, maybe we do know, maybe we don't know. And yet this is, again, a really compelling image. And I'm reminded of one of the very first comments that we had for the first image we looked at was when Chuck said, you know, you're really drawn to those two figures and in the first landscape. And I said, well, but they're not in the middle of the picture. Why are we so drawn to it? And he said, because like you want to look them in the eyes. And I think that's also going on here, that as much as the words give us something, because we love written words, to try and puzzle out, there's also there's something really compelling in the look that this person is giving us and wanting to either connect with them or feeling like they're trying to communicate something to us with those eyes, that then picks up the fact that because of the coloration of the photo, the eyes and the paint and the words and the shirt are all pretty similar in hue. More thoughts, more questions? Do you guys want to hit another poem? Okay, I'm seeing enough nods. So the yeah, and Daniel's just said there's something mildly disturbing about words on a face too. Like this, again, inscribing the body isn't necessarily a negative thing. And there are lots of cultures where either paint or tattooing is a positive way to inscribe the body, but the words do seem, maybe because there are so many negative words, like it's not a body at ease with those words. So as usual, I've come up with way more than we're going to get to talk about. And I had one poem that is, that I just took excerpts from, and we're not going to even get through all of those excerpts. So I think I'm going to jump us ahead a couple slides to look at not the first excerpt from the poem, but this excerpt from the poem. And this is a poem, it's excerpted from a poem called Nature Poem, which is actually a book-length poem by Tommy Pico. I can't write a nature poem because the conversation happens in the Hall of South American Peoples in the American Museum of Natural History. between two white ladies in buttery shawls as they pass a display case of traditional garb from one tribe or another. It doesn't really matter to anyone. And that word natural in natural history hangs. Also history, also peoples. Hangs as in frames. It's horrible how their culture was destroyed, as if in some reckless storm. But thank God we were able to save some of these artifacts. History is so important. Will you look at that metalwork? I could cry. Look, I'm sure you really do just want to wear those dream catcher earrings. They're beautiful. I'm sure you don't mean any harm. I'm sure you don't really think about us at all. I'm sure you don't understand the concept of off limits. But what if by not wearing a headdress in your music video or changing your damn mascot and perhaps adding 0.05% of personal annoyance to your life for the 20 minutes it lasts, the 103 young people who tried to kill themselves on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation over the past 4 months wanted to live 50% more? I don't want to be seen generally. I'm a natural introvert, and I don't want to be seen by white ladies in buttery shawls, but I will literally die if I don't scream. I kind of love Tommy Pico's poetry. I have skipped you past the section where he talks about Portland, which is a little bit cruel for me to do. But the last comment that somebody made about the image we were looking at is appropriately disturbing. So maybe that's a good place to start here. Is this appropriately disturbing? Are we guilty as charged? Is Chip Thomas guilty as charged by the speaker in this poem? Or what? Where are we identifying now?
Hey, Chris, start us off again, and then check after that.
When I was a kid, I used to go to the Hayden Planetarium at the Museum of Natural History every weekend. They would have the guy would just make up a different show every week. Now let's see what it looks like from Pluto, you know. So I was often wandering around in the museum, and the stuffed animal dioramas didn't creep me out, but there was a, what appeared to be a stuffed, maybe Central American native, you know, spear, and, you know, and I found that pretty disturbing.
Right, so the museum that doesn't know how to stop the difference between putting objects on display, artifacts on display, and putting people on display. And even those artifacts, right? It's never the artifact of like, here's what a Wall Street executive has on their desk, right? That, as we know, is all naturalized. But artifacts are from cultures that are weird and different and need to be objectified in the museum space in a particular way. And it extends, as you said, often even to the people who are also trapped in a past, right?
And it has to be done quickly before we finish killing them all.
Yeah, right. Which is another story we love to tell. One of my friends who's Native is very concerned about Black Lives Matter because it turns out the police actually kill more Native people than Black people in the United States. Not that we need to put those in competition. But I said, right, but America loves the spectacle of harming Black people. That has been since the enslavement a really important part of the way that white supremacy operates in America, while pretending that Indians are all gone, or maybe there are only about 12 of them left, is another way that white supremacy operates in America. So as you said, right, before they're all gone, which lets us be so glad, thank God we were able to save some of these artifacts. Chuck, you've been waiting patiently.
I would just like to point out the contrast or the similarity between this poem and the last poem, and that the observer in this poem is like the coyote in some way, still sort of hanging back and observing the white people. He's not observing the narrator is not observing the natives here, just the artifacts.
Although I'll push you a little bit, because I don't think that anybody would call Coyote a natural introvert, whereas the speaker in this poem has said, I'm a natural introvert. And so I think that there is a difference there, but also that, like, I will literally die if I don't scream. Now, we are in a culture where people use literally all the time when they don't mean literally. It is irritating to those of us who understand the difference between figuratively and literally. So I want to maybe hone in on this line. When the speaker says, I will literally die if I don't scream. is that just like literally another example of how like literally all the time people are like literally always saying literally when they don't like literally mean literally? Or is there something to I will literally die if I don't scream? And I don't mean to put Chuck on the spot. Any of you can feel free to answer.
Well, if you're going to put me on, I'll be put on the spot. I mean, I think it's both. I think it's making fun at the way that we use that modern contemporary culture uses the term literally, but then there's the truth, the so-called the literal truth, where if the voice does not scream about native actual current existence, that they aren't all gone, then that is a kind of death, and is leading to literal death. Is, you know, they refer to the Pine Ridge youth who are dying rather than screaming, although maybe they're screaming too, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that idea of, you know, if I scream, you have to remember that the native people are not just on display, as Chris was sort of creeped out to see them as a child, but are actual real people around you. We are still here. And as you said, that in some ways, there's a different kind of screaming that comes from self-harm and taking one's own life. And that this is an assertion that I will literally die if I don't scream means I'm going to scream because I'm not willing to die. I'm going to make you feel uncomfortable for the 20 minutes that it's going to make you feel uncomfortable just to say that we are going to survive. And Emma's also commented that literally kind of fits in with the colloquial nature of this language. And I should say, you don't see it in this section, and I don't know if we'll get to the other sections, but one of the things that Tommy Pico does, which a number of folks writing now do, including writing protest signs now, is to spell Indian NDN, right? Which is both kind of plays on the shorthand that we use in text messaging and tweeting and things like that, but I think also is claiming an Indian identity that is separate from Christopher Columbus not understanding that he's not in India, he's in the Caribbean. Molly, you said it's even more urgent than literally. What do you mean?
Well, I think literally here is used in the context that it's used, sort of similar to what Emma was saying about, I mean, this is, my kids use the word literally all the time, and they mean it very seriously, like literally I will, and it's like this urgency that's, we think about, you know, the literal nature of the word, it conveys an urgency that is imperative, like it's an imperative.
I put in the chat about Ed Curtis. I'm not sure if that's going off on a tangent, but I'm curious what people here as photographers think about that. Because I do love Edward Curtis. I know it's a tangent kind of, but what he did was very controversial. Like he appropriated people and put them into garb to take pictures of them. But I still think he's one of my favorite photographers of all. I think what he did was amazing and historically relevant, but it was very, for the times. I don't know, that probably is for another session. I think it's interesting, and I don't think that Tommy Pico would really like it. But I'm just saying.
I think that, I think you're right that we could spend a long session talking about it. And I should say, there's somebody I know who has talked about how he and his wife, and they're from different Native nations, but that they have both often found family pictures in Edward Curtis style collections, which is to say that these more anthropological, we need to photograph these people before they all die out, completely problematic, completely objectifying, completely not empowering to the subject, are also the places that you can find photographs of your family. And so this question about like the problematic documentation, you know, in one of the earlier sessions, I talked a little bit about lynching postcards, right? They're horrific to think about the way in which they were originally produced and circulated, but also for as a historian, really important to document the way that white supremacy enforced white supremacy using photography. And I think that we'd probably find Curtis kind of on that point. And Jude has put in the chat, taking us back to the poem, that you know, history is so important. He puts in the mouth of the white lady in the buttery shawl, I hope my shawl is not buttery, that really not wanting, it's this idea of history that ignores history, right? That the acquisition of the artifacts is a history that is not acknowledged either by the museum or by the people who are walking through the museum. And then that question of history, Linda picks up to talk about Curtis, right? That it is, he wasn't depicting people in their lives necessarily, he was depicting what he wanted to depict of their lives. And that is also problematic. And when I've been in spaces where people are in regalia, they will often say, don't take our pictures. This is, we're doing this as part of the practice that is our lives, and it's not a show for you to record and post on your social media. Do you guys want to end with one more image? I'm so sad that we won't get to look at more of Tommy Pico's poem. I might actually have Amanda send you some more of the pieces of it because it's so freaking awesome. I should say it comes, there's a wonderful book called New Poets of Native Nations that came out maybe 2 years ago. And that is where I discovered this Tommy Pico poem and many other wonderful, wonderful poems. Now I have to remember which pictures there are to look at. There's that one. Oh, but there are also these ones. Maybe we should go to these ones as they are yet more in a different direction. And again, Chip includes this in his work. I don't know how these were made or what level of collaboration goes into them. And they're, once again, sort of really different than the other pieces that we've looked at. So they're not, I just put two on one slide because, you know me, I always want to stuff more in. And I will say the image on the right, it says parezco illegal, meaning do I look illegal? And this is something you will recall that he lives, that outside of the Navajo Nation are the states of Arizona and New Mexico, where there is a great deal of tension around migration across the border. So either one or both of these images, what thoughts do you have? Ooh, sorry.
Chuck, start us off.
Well, you know, I just read in the news today that Customs and Border Protection actually seriously had to talk about using a heat ray, a microwave weapon, on migrants before the 2018 midterm elections. And they didn't do it, but it's sort of in, and I just read that this afternoon, and in light of that information, this takes on a whole new quality.
Tell us what you mean. I'm going to make you spell it out for us.
Because it looks like this is like comic book rays from the eyes. Like Superman has a heat ray. It has X-ray vision, but I think also has heat ray vision. That it's a weapon.
But here, it's the native figure on the left. And we could talk about why I'm saying it's a native figure, but why I'm hesitantly saying it's a native figure.
Right.
And this kind of supernatural, but also obviously actually human figure on the right that seems to have the X-ray vision, not
Right, the supernatural, or the guy on the right looks like, I mean, what I imagine a Mexican wrestler looks like. I don't know that that's the only place in the world that people dress up like that to wrestle, or whether that's there could be some other meaning that we can get from it as well.
But that whole idea of alien, like you said, illegal, alien, and then you've got
Alien.
the alien and the rays of the,
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, totally.
Yeah.
Nice play. I love that one. And like, I love the fact that it's just like painted on the side of a building like that, like murals and little town, I don't know. I think of,
Well, again, and that is a very common practice in Chip Thomas's work, is to wheat paste things. Although this, I think he was not on Resland. I think he did this in town, as it were. And I don't know about the image on the left in terms of the where or how it got created or where or how it got displayed.
Can you tell me what the words mean again? Is it that do I look illegal?
Do I look illegal?
So I wonder if that verb in Spanish also can mean look as an act, right? The rays are this, right? This act. I'm looking.
it's a verb, could be used.
Right. I don't know if it translates or not.
My Spanish is very weak. If we have anybody whose Spanish is better, I invite you.
Yeah, I think different verb. It's to look at something is like mirar.
Okay.
Mirar, and then to parezco means do I like appear.
Appear, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a better pun in English.
Although I like the idea of the apparitional nature of this figure.
Well, and the figure itself is wheat pasted, but you can see from the drips that the red is painted directly on the wall, and it's dripping blood in a way that a wheat paste wouldn't.
Oh, right. That when we're dripping red, we're always dripping blood.
And the one on the left, it's interesting because he has tennis shoes on, it looks like, but because he's made it cross or something, you got the back kind of like more, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. I like the one on the right more, but he's done some interesting things there.
Well, right.
He's got rays out of his eyes too, by the way.
Yeah. The one on the left both has these elements that we would think of as traditional regalia, right? It looks like there's probably a feathered headdress and some kind of something worn across the face, across the forehead, but also like totally, I recognize that brand of tennis shoes.
Edith.
I was not going to do product placement, but Chris has done it for us. And I also wonder, and again, I don't know how collaborative these works were in terms of creating the figures or creating the way that the figures are represented. So I don't know that Chip would talk about these as though they were just his work. But I also wonder whether he would have made pieces like this aesthetically before he had spent so many years, decades really, on the res, because in some ways I feel like there's a sensibility or a sense of humor that maybe you saw coming through, especially the first poem, because we get to see the whole poem, that is aware and engaged, but also with a sense of ironic distance. And I feel like that is operating visually in these images. Do you get what I mean by that? Like, he knows that that's a supernatural figure who's also clearly a Mexican wrestler, that's also clearly like just a person dressed up like a Mexican wrestler.
Yeah, I think you're right that ambiguity is part of the richness of it, for sure.
And then I think it's also very much a kind of res culture sensibility. Or at least influenced by that sensibility.
What is that thing above the head of the image on the right? It looks like a rock.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Is that something that was
And
there a image already on that building that they wheat pasted over?
or is it just that's a stucco wall and the stucco's fallen off and there's some other masonry underneath it? It's
There's
hard to,
also the remnants of an image of a face behind the red. So I was imagining that's all some kind of advertising
I don't think it's advertising.
billboard behind there.
It's square form, black border, this rock above this head. I think it's might even be a previous Chip Thomas. Oh, I don't know.
We're right. We might have
Interesting.
a palimpsestic Chip Thomas on top of Chip Thomas. Like, I thought I was giving you one message, but now I'm back with another message. Jude has been busily detecting what's going on in the headband on the image on the left. Does it look like there's a word on there? Korbe. So this could even be a kid at a rave dancing in an appropriated native headdress. Or it could be a native kid in appropriated Adidas sneakers. We don't know. There's, oh, I wish I could remember the name of the artist. I've seen this work in a couple different places, who has two paired videos, and one of them is somebody doing, I forget which Northwest tribe they're from, but doing like the Raven dance to hip hop music. And the paired video is a hip hop dancer dancing to a Northwest tribal chant. It's amazing, right? Because these are both clearly from particular cultures and from cultures that get appropriated by other cultures, but also like having this fun thing of the switch back and forth.
At Chip's Artist Talk, he brought in a dancer who was a combination hip hop and traditional dancer, and it was very amazing.
Yeah. And you know, there's a certain extent to which all culture is some cultural appropriation, right? That long before colonization, there was interplay between the different indigenous tribes and groups that would have influenced each other. That, you know, if people were near a shore and had access to things that come out of the ocean and trade them with people who live further inland and have access to things that grow in the mountains, that's already a trading of cultures. But it gets ratcheted up, I think, in part because of commodification that happens in a different way. And once you industrialize and create a real capitalist system.
But it does bring us back around to the trickster of, you know, do you want to keep everything the same, or is somebody going to shake things up? And I think what's viewed as cultural appropriation is often collaboration and innovation and trickster at work.
So maybe that's our final question, right? Is Chip Thomas the ultimate trickster in this story?
Sure.
I kind of like that as our, oh, and now again, as usual, I look at my watch and I'm like, oh, we've been talking for so long, it seems like we just got started. Maybe we'll leave it there. Maybe we'll leave it with Chip Thomas. He's our trickster. And it is interesting because, again, he's shaking things up with his art, but also, as you said, Chris, kind of moving from one place to another and both taking in the culture, collaborating with the culture, and producing something new and different that wouldn't be there otherwise. So as a parting shot, I will thank you all for your contributions. As ever, this is really fun and I learned a lot. I hope that you enjoyed yourself and feel as edified as I do. And I will again remind you that we're doing this next on September 23rd. And Keely Yuyan's work will be up in the gallery before then, so you'll have a chance to see it in person, but I'll also have the images to share. And we'll be talking about that then. And it is not entirely an accident that I wanted us to look at Chip Thomas today because Keely's work. Well, does somebody from Blue Sky want to give us a quick, like, tell us a little bit about Keely's work to make the connection?
I could say a little something.
Yeah, please.
So Keely is Native Siberian as well as Chinese American, and so he spends a lot of his time up in the various parts of the Arctic, collaborating with and photographing different indigenous people who call the Arctic home. So and he also does a lot of work that's not photo based, that's about preserving his own cultural heritage, especially with boat making. So he has a lot of really interesting perspectives about his work as a photographer and also about his own cultural heritage and how he relates with other people and their
and you can see it in Blue Sky Gallery starting the first Thursday in September. Is that right?
That's
yeah,
right.
September 3rd.
And Zemi's going to be doing an Instagram live convo with Keely on first Thursday. So definitely be sure to tune in for that.
What if somebody's tragically uncool and doesn't know how to use Instagram? How would they have access to that?
They could click on the link that we're going to send out in the email about it, and you can watch it on your desktop browser, or you can watch it later on our YouTube channel. We've uploaded all of the talks to that too.
The same way that if you wanted to recommend today's conversation or any of our previous salons to somebody, they could also watch those on the YouTube channel, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being part of this.
Thanks, Lois. Yay.
Yeah, thank you,
everybody.
Lois.
Nice to see you, everybody.
Oh, I forgot to recommend that movie I was going to recommend. I can still recommend it to the people who are here.
What is it?
I may have already recommended it to the Blue Sky crew.
movie?
So it's called Rumble, Indians Who Rocked the World.
Oh no, I think I seen part Rumble. Yeah.
It just came out last year, and for those of you who are card-carrying members of the Multnomah County Library, you can watch it for free using Canopy on the library
My
system.
husband and I saw something.
It's about the influence that
Oh
Native
no,
people
I
had
saw
on rock and
that
roll.
because the guy who had hit did the Jackson Brown and he died of heroin. Oh, yeah, we saw that. Yeah, that great Jackson Brown. Anyway, whatever. Of course, he died of heroin overdose, sadly. But yeah, that's a great movie. Actually, that's great music documentary.
I highly recommend it. And whatever you do, don't go on tour with Rod Stewart. That's what we
Yeah.
Don't go on tour with Rod Stewart.
But hey, Keith Richards, you can't make a blanket statement about it, but it's sad. Okay, right.
All right. Am I the host? Do I have to actually end this party?
I'll leave. Bye.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lois.
Looks like everyone left. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night.